Well, hey, North Park Community Church. It's Pastor Luke here with another episode of First Looks. And we are continuing on in our journey through the Gospel of Matthew. And in today's passage, we're going to be in chapter 9. We're going to be picking up in verse 9. And we're going to go all the way to verse 17. And so we have what appears to be two separate stories. I think Matthew has paired these two stories together very intentionally because I think there is a complementary effect between both of these stories that they have on one another. And so that's where we're at today. Just by way of reminder, our series is, I hope you have it memorized by now, The Way of the King. And it's just helpful to keep on our minds just the context of what's been going on. So just kind of reminding ourselves here, we had way back in chapter 8, we had a couple of miraculous healings that happened. And so we had, in 8, we had cleansing the leper. We had the centurion servant healed. We had just many other healings that happened there. And then we had, after that, the cost of discipleship lesson there. And then we have the calming of the storm. We'll get all starting with C's. That's good. That's good pastoring right there, starting everything with C's. Then we rolled into chapter 9, and we had Jesus casting out the demons. Carrying on with the C's. We'll see how far we can take this. Casting out demons. And then last week's message, that was actually end of chapter 8 still. We started chapter 9 last week. So that's still 8. So 9. We have how are we going to do a C on this? The healing of the paralytic. I'm going to spend too much time trying to think about how to come up with another C for the story of the healing of the paralytic. No, I don't know. We'll give up just because otherwise I'll lose too many people watching this one. I'd take too long coming up with that. Healing of the paralytic. So that's the context, and what we're gonna have now is the calling of Matthew. Oh, there's calling of Matthew. I gotta come up with another C. We have the calling of Matthew and the a teaching on fasting after that. And so why this is important for us to maybe just keep in mind is because 5 through 7 is Sermon on Mount. And obviously that's... Then we have all of this happening here. And then when we get into 10, we're going to have the next long teaching. And Matthew's gospel, it's punctuates, it almost kind of anchors the gospel around 5 really important teaching units. And so the Sermon on the Mount is the first one, and chapter 10 will be the second one. And so all this stuff that's happening here in chapters 8 and 9, that's stuff that is It is displaying, it is reiterating, it is exemplifying, it is affirming, it's giving authority to the teachings. That's what's happening in all of these stories that are in between the big teaching units. And so, just kind of with that on our minds, we get to our text, and Jesus, he passed on from where he from there, and there is Capernaum, where he did the healing of the paralytic. And he saw a man. Jesus saw. I think that's important because it shows Jesus seeing and seeking. His disciples. A man by the name of Matthew, and we know that his alternate name is Levi. Now that might throw us off a little bit where we come from, but it was a pretty common thing. There are a number of examples of characters in the Bible who have two different names that they'll go by. So Matthew, sometimes referred to as Levi, he was sitting at his tax booth, which means he's a tax collector. Which equals hated by Israelites / Jews. This is probably pretty familiar to anybody listening to this, but tax collectors, they were employed by Rome, who occupied Israel, and they were in charge of collecting the taxes from the people. But tax collectors were famous for taking much more than what Rome required, and all the extra that they took that went straight into their pockets, and so they got rich by taking advantage of their fellow countrymen, their religious brothers, and by doing the work of pagan Gentiles, and so they were scum. They were certainly viewed as scum, and what's interesting here, and I actually got a question from somebody I was asking about this is, and I don't have an answer right off the top of my head, and so I'm going to see if I can figure anything out here. But here is the question: is why does Matthew refer to himself as the author of this gospel in the third person rather than first person? And I don't know that I have an answer for that right off the top of my head, but I think it's something that's worth pondering. It might be that he was more concerned with the story of Jesus than his own personal attestation to what happened. I don't know. I'm gonna see if any commentators make any notes on that, but it is a fascinating question that there's a man called Matthew, and the man called Matthew is the one who's writing this very story. It's obviously this has led to some critics of the scriptures to say that the authorship really doesn't belong to Matthew, but you're always going to have the critics out there. Church history just overwhelmingly affirms this gospel to be Matthew's gospel, written by him, the man who is in the story. And so Jesus says to him, let me get a color here. Okay, he says to him, here, let's follow me. And this obviously reminds us of the call of fishermen in what's I think chapter 4 is where that's at, I think. And what does Matthew do? He rose and followed him. I think that's very noteworthy. This appears to be an immediate obedience to Jesus' call. Now, I think it's important for us to remember, this is a descriptive account, not prescriptive norm, and so there is a good lesson, but we ought not press it further than what is right. I say that to say the reason I'm writing that is because Matthew he's sitting in his tax booth. Jesus comes up to him, calls him, to follow him, and immediately Matthew gets up and follows him. And while there needs to be obedience to the call to follow Jesus, the story looks different for everybody. Sometimes they get the call a couple different times, and maybe the first few times they ignore it, or they make excuses, or they delay or whatever. But there is always a time when the call is effective, the effectual call. And the effectual call is one that is, sometimes we say, irresistible and undeniable. But just wanting to flesh that out a little bit, that there's the account that we see from Matthew, but then there's the theology that goes behind it on how salvation works itself out, and then we have various different stories and journeys that show how the theology looks in different in different accounts and whatnot. And so that's all I'm trying to say with that. Now let's keep going here, because this is going to get real interesting. Jesus reclined at the table in the house, and so what's going on here is Jesus eats at dinner party at Matt's house. And we know some of these details that Matthew doesn't include here from Mark and Luke's accounts. And so Jesus is reclining at table. Another important note with this is this is symbolic of acceptance, fellowship, and even even a point of identification. Now, what's really important to delineate is that Jesus is with tax collectors and sinners. Now, he is not accepting sin, and he's not identifying with their sin, but he is having fellowship. Fellowship is the key here. There's a breaking of bread, and there is an accepting of them as they've come to him and to follow him and to listen to him and what. So as they receive Jesus, Jesus also is in turn receiving them. But this is anathema to the Pharisees who show up right here. They saw this and they said to the disciples of Jesus, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? This is crazy. Because why? Look, it's like this, and Jesus will flesh this out in this next illustration that he'll give. But table fellowship with unclean people makes you unclean. This is the law right here. Is if you eat with them, it makes you unclean, not just and that's religiously and morally, both. Okay, so that's huge, and Jesus is doing just that. Now, let me take you somewhere here. Look at this unclean via fellowship is the concept here that's being talked about. But remember this. This sermon's and it was also with the centurion as well. I had this all in the same sermon, and the big idea for this message was Jesus makes unclean things clean. And so we apply that down here to this. The Pharisees who are saying eating with tax collectors and sinners is going to make you unclean, and Jesus is saying that's not how it works. That's not what I've come to do. I've come to make unclean things clean. Jesus does not touch the leper and become contaminated himself. He touches the leper and makes the leper clean. The cleanness, the cleansing of Jesus goes outward. The infection doesn't come inward, so to speak. And so that maybe starts to pick up on the imagery that he gives us. So Jesus hears this and he says, look, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. This is what Jesus came for. This is who he came for. Now, here's the thing of it. We'll pose it in the form of another question here. Are the Pharisees well or sick? Well, the answer is that they're sick, but they don't know it. They think they're doing okay. They think they're well, and they're not. And so then Jesus will go on to say, go and learn what this means. Sit with this for a while. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And that's a quote from Hosea 6:6. Well, we're going to call it cross-reference. say cited from. Cited from Hosea 6:6. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Not to call righteous, but sinners. The people at the table are the people Jesus came for. That's what Jesus is telling us. So another maybe interesting connection point. Let me get another color to just kind of not get too lost in all the lines here. Remember in the cost of discipleship story, there were two men, one scribe, one disciple, who want to follow Jesus. And Jesus gives them the cost of discipleship talk. And he says, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And to the disciple who says, let me go bury my father, and Jesus says, let the dead bury their dead. And so Jesus responds to these two men with kind of a warning to count the cost and to think through what they're talking about. But down here, we see Jesus seeking out and calling these particular people, and I think it's just worth keeping that those two things kind of in our minds, because they're pretty close together in Matthew's gospel, and so I think we should probably be keeping them together in our minds as we approach this text. So with that then said, here's the second story that I think actually comes together well with this. So Jesus is feasting with Matthew, and then the disciples of John came to him. So this is John the Baptist. And I want to make some denominational jokes here, but I'm going to refrain. And John the Baptist came, the disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus, and they said, why do we and the Pharisees fast? Here's the question. Let me, since we've been tracking questions here, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? His disciples are eating a meal, probably a really good meal and probably a really expensive meal, because Matthew had cash, and so just as a little context, the Pharisees fasted twice a week. That was the common practice. John is he's got an ascetic a kind of personality, and it's talked about even about his. John didn't come eating and drinking. Jesus will say later in chapter 11, chapter 12, or something like that. So he's known for his asceticism, a little bit more of an ascetic life, and so naturally his disciples would be similar in that. And so John is known as one who does not come as as not coming, eating, and drinking. And so, John's disciples are, we fast because it seems right and appropriate. Even the Pharisees, who, they're not understanding Jesus, but they do have a level of fervency and zeal for righteousness according to the law that you don't just dismiss. All right, and but here's the thing. This is where it's gonna connect with what's up here. And so let me get another color that I can use. I'll use the purple. We haven't used much of that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I desire mercy, not sacrifice. This is what Jesus wants right there. Mercy, not sacrifice. Pharisees fast. So do we. We fast. Pharisees fast. And I think all this is gonna. Your disciples do not fast. I think all of this kind of works together, and I think it's working like this. We're seeing that righteousness is bound up in love / mercy, not religious. I shouldn't say not. It's not is not the correct word. Over, maybe I'll say that, religious observances. Because here's the thing that the Pharisees aren't picking up on is they might sacrifice perfectly in the way that they give their offerings and their sacrifices and things like that. They might be perfect at it. But Jesus says, if you're offering up all of your sacrifices and you've neglected mercy, you've missed the point. And down here with John's disciples, they might be fasting, but have they understood and do they understand what's in front of them right now? And or are they just continuing on with their quote unquote sacrifice of food, we could say, in their fast, and missing the main thing? Because the reality is Jesus has come to shake things up. Things are different now that Jesus is on the scene. And that's exactly what he goes on to say. Look at this here. He gives two pictures for us. He says, can the wedding guests, he actually gives us three. Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? This is Jesus, the bridegroom, and the wedding guests are the disciples. And the answer is absolutely no. When with Jesus, there is joy and celebration. When you're with Jesus, you feast. Jesus brings feasting. That'll preach. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. Okay, fasting is not gone for us in the church because Jesus came, and so we would see examples in Acts of church fasting together, fasting and praying. when Jesus is taken from them. Now, because Jesus is taken away, does that mean that we no longer feast and celebrate? No, not at all. We carry both of these things together now. He goes on to give us another, again, two more pictures here, and these next two pictures will kind of work together for the same point, where he says, no one puts unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will tear away from the garment. So when you put an unshrunk piece perfectly over, say, a hole of your jeans, and then your jeans have already been shrunk because they've been washed a few times, and you know that because you put a hole in them, and so your jeans are shrunk. But when you put a patch on that has not been shrunk and it gets washed and then it shrinks, it'll tear the old garment. That's what it says. The patch will tear away the old garment. And a worse tear is made. Same thing with the new wine. When you have new wine, it's still fermenting and it's releasing gases and things like that. And when you have an old wineskin is one that's become brittle and kind of hardened over time. And so when you have the expansion of the gases from the fermenting new wine inside an old brittle wineskin, that wineskin will burst. And so Jesus says here, no, if it is, the skins will burst and the wine is spilled and skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins so that both are preserved. So what are the both here? The both are the new wine and the fresh wineskins. Now, people have many suggestions as to what the wine and wine skins represent. Some will say the Old Covenant and New Covenant. Some will say that it's just the old way of approaching the law and the new freedom that comes in the gospel of grace. Some people will say that it's just that Jesus is just saying that he's doing a new thing, that things are being changed with him. And so, we'll want to. I think that we find the key that unlocks this when we look at the Old Testament's use of new wine and fresh wine, and when you actually see the motif of wine that runs throughout, especially the prophets, I think you start to unlock what Jesus is after here. And I'm not going to tell you that answer, but maybe you could go look at Isaiah 25 to help you out a little bit. That'll come in the message. So that's what we got here. I've gone on a little longer than I thought I would here, but this is a good. This is a beautiful lesson here from Jesus that I think will have something really beautiful for us as we just consider just the path we're on as disciples of Jesus and what it looks like for us to live faithfully following after him. And so that's what we got. So please be praying for me, church. Sometimes when I look at this paper, when I'm done, I think, oh boy, what are we going to do with this to make it into a sermon? But the Lord is faithful, and He will, I'm sure, supply the message that His people need to hear. And so, please be praying for me as I work on this. And I love you, and I'll see you Sunday. God bless.